There it is. All right. It is Wednesday, everybody. It is our last show of the week, and we have a great one for y'all today. Today, we are talking about sex positivity. It's going to be a fun one. Here we go.
Practicing polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
Hey, you guys don't see it, but I'm dancing in the background, enjoying that song every single time. Welcome, 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 everybody. Once again, it is a beautiful Wednesday afternoon over here in sunny San Diego. Before we jump in and chat with our awesome guest today, I want to quickly remind everybody to please follow the show on all social medias at Practicing Poly A, right down there. And if you are listening on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast app, please subscribe, leave a review wherever it is that you're downloading the pod. Also, if you'd like to support the show, please send me a DM on whichever social media that you prefer, your favorite one. Ask me about your malpractice or errors in emissions insurance. I'm an insurance guy. I can help you out. And as always, I want to remind you, if you are listening to this show, you are a welcomed guest to be on the show. If you're actively polyamorous, polyam curious, or a professional serving the polyamorous community, I want to hear your story. If you're disabled, BIPOC, pan, bi, demi, gay, straight, sex worker, kinkster, queer, lesbian, trans, NB, aero, ace, whatever. I want to hear your story. The more stories we hear, the more the world learns about us, the more representation we have, and the better we can serve our community. All right, that's my spiel every day. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get on with the show. Today's amazing guest is an ASEX and Gottman Institute certified sex therapist who takes an educational approach to therapy. She sees her role as asking useful, thought-provoking questions, and she provides resources, tools, and handouts while providing honest and caring feedback. Our guest cares not only about her clients, but also about the world at large. She's been involved in social, racial, and economic justice for several years, and she brings an enduring awareness of class, race, gender, and systems of oppression to conversations in therapy. No matter your background, and despite our generally sex-negative society, you can be sure to find an ally with her. Helping people find solutions to problems that seem unsolvable to them is the most rewarding part of her job. She often brings humor and lightness to conversations about aspects of life that are typically unspoken. Joining us today from sexpositivetherapist.com, welcome to the show, Kate McNulty.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I forgot to warn you about that. We have movie clips and we have audio and we have these little things that we play to have fun. But yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I love a multimedia experience. Thanks for having me. And I'm delighted to be here and to learn more about your show because it just sounds like you're a very inclusive host. And this is the kind of work that thrills me, to be bringing people together and talking about important ideas and helping communities generate possibilities.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I am definitely trying to be as inclusive as possible. And it seems like you've done a lot of the same type of work. Can you give me a little bit of background on yourself, some of this work that you've done, and specifically about how you work within the polyamorous community?
Well, now I have a private practice and I just see couples, thruples or individuals in my office. So I'm not so community oriented in my business life, but I've been very involved in activism and that's important to me. And I really see that, people who are thinking about new ideas and open to new relationship structures and creative ways of being in relationship tend to be like-minded in terms of being exploratory and curious. So that's part of what is meaningful to me about this work, is meeting so many people who are imaginative and just open to a lot of possibilities for themselves.
Yeah, I suppose we have to be open to those possibilities because I know that a lot of people are feeling a lot like this guy.
I wasn't aware that was something a person could do.
when they think about, when we think about, or when we first get introduced to polyamory or any of these things, it's all mind-blowing, it's all new. And to be completely honest with you, even a lot of the stuff that I mentioned in your intro, the race, gender, systems of oppression, all of these different activism things, that a lot of those things are pretty new to me. Can you tell me a little bit about your work there in the past?
Well, when I think about the idea of monogamous relationships and the legal structure of marriage, that's a very fundamental value in our society. But those practices are about property and ownership of people.
Hmm.
It all originates in women being the property of their husbands. And that
Mm.
the more we think about flexible relationships and relationships where people have both rights and freedoms, we're really speaking a revolutionary kind of language, is the way I
Yes.
see it.
I totally agree with that. Traditionally, when we think about stuff like gender roles, there are things that define what a real man is supposed to be. And a lot of that is being changed and challenged, uh, not just by polyamory, but by society at large. Can you tell me? Can you kind of speak to that? The challenging of these gender roles that you see in your work.
One thing that comes to my mind is how, of course, I think we're coming to recognize how much men lose by needing to be emotionally controlled and emotionally shut down. And that's certainly something I hear, in straight relationships. I hear a lot of complaints repeatedly about women saying, my husband doesn't seem like he really expresses a lot of feelings, or I don't really know what his inner world is like. And so I think men are starting to recognize the richness and possibility of having a deep emotional life and being expressive people. But I also think about it, I mean, in the context of your show, I think about the ways that so many people get caught up in relationships where they're keeping secrets from their partner, or they're cheating.
Hmm.
They're straying from the relationship, they're breaking promises. And I think that part of that is that people haven't had exposure to the kinds of ideas that you're explaining. And so they have this terrible identity of themselves as somebody who is immoral or
Hmm.
has something wrong with them, when really, if they understood more about how to navigate complexities in relationships and express themselves more clearly, we'd all be operating in a very different society, because there would be more skill and more care
Hmm.
that we could exercise with one another, instead of getting caught up in these awful situations where people are leading a secret life and looking at porn or going to strippers or paying sex workers and keeping it on the down low.
Right.
So the more we can help people express themselves in a healthful way and take responsibility for their desires, but also feel more freedom about expressing their desires and being articulate about how they want to live, communicating clearly to their partners and the people around them. That's what's going to help move us toward a new future.
I 100% agree with that. And a lot of that really, in my opinion, comes from that generally sex negative culture. We're taught, we're programmed to believe in monogamy being, the one true way, and
Hmm.
that's, the path that we're all very much expected to follow. And so when we have these desires outside of our relationship, it's viewed just generally as negative. Is that I guess that's kind of my interpretation of being sex negative, where we don't want to stray outside of these relationships. We need to stay just within the relationship, even if our needs aren't being met.
Hmm. Hmm.
Would you say that there's a lot of that that's kind of embroiled in that same philosophy?
Yeah, and what I see in my practice is a lot of people who are very nice. They know how to be nice to their partner, and they would rather avoid conflict if at all possible. And so that's what puts them in this position where their sexual self, their desires and their sexual imagination expands beyond the bounds of what they're doing in the relationship with a monogamous partner. And so they decide, well, because I'm nice and I don't want to have a hassle with my partner, I don't want to cause distress for anybody, I'm just going to handle it over here. I'm going to put it over on the side and do something different with it with another person and keep
Mhm.
it away from my partner, as though I don't want it to contaminate the life that I have. And so people who can uh, take more time to name their feelings and get to know their feelings and be honest with themselves as well as their partners, that's when we're going to have a healthier kind of relationship, and people who all feel better because things are more clear. Everybody can live in
Mhm.
integrity and have more of a sense of wholeness, and that they get to be the real self that they are with the people who are intimates in their life,
Right.
instead of this hiddenness and
Give it a 10. A 10.
That was random. But yeah, this type of thinking, this hiding of other partners or other desires, it's not exclusive to monogamy, right? It
Mhm,
happens in
mhm.
polyamorous
True.
relationships
Yeah.
all the time. Cheating happens in
Mhm,
polyamory. If anybody's
mhm.
listening out there, it happens. Okay, we're not immune to that. So, what are some of the things that, if there is that desire that's not being met, somebody doesn't necessarily want to talk to their partner about it, even if we're in polyamorous situations, what are some strategies that you start talking your clients through to help open up that conversation and get things moving?
Well, first of all, we have to get clear within ourselves, and that's part of the value of what you can do with a skilled therapist, is somebody who's going to help you sort of untangle stuff that's going on inside of you. And if you don't have a therapist, or you'd rather not visit someone like that, just getting a good friend, having a confidant who's a peer with you, who can help you express yourself. But I think getting the conversation going with somebody else is another level of challenge, and that often involves things like making time, making sure your partner knows, listen, I have something I'd like to talk about, and it might be kind of sensitive, so when's a good time for us to get together? I don't want to
Hmm.
spring anything on you, but I want you to know we need to allow ourselves some privacy and a time and place we can concentrate a bit.
Hmm.
Right? So people need to be ready for that kind of preamble. They need to have an agreement, like, this is what we do when something's hot is coming up, so that we know we can get ourselves ready. And then having the focus and the concentration to recognize we have to take care of one another's feelings when we're having these kinds of conversations.
Hmm.
And one way we talk about this in therapy is, it's difficult because we're asking our brains to do something that they're not really structured to do. But when we're in a conflict situation or a challenging situation, we want to listen for, what do we agree with about what the other person's saying. We don't
Ah.
want to prepare our argument and counter them and argue our own point of view. We want to try to listen when they talk for, what are the parts that we can affirm, or we can validate, or we can see, like, well, I guess that I understand why it might be like that for you. It hurts me, it worries me, I don't like hearing that, but I can understand why you might have that experience or that point of view.
Absolutely love that strategy. That's something that I hadn't really heard or thought of before. To and that is a habit I know that a lot of people get into. When we're having these conversations, we are preparing our argument. We're listening to be able to argue whatever it is that we're arguing for. But
Mhm.
you are saying, listen to what you agree with. Listen for what you agree with. I Bravo on that one. That one, I give it
Not
a
easy to
10.
do. Easy for me to say, not so easy to do, because that's not how we're naturally wired. We get anxiety going, and we want to
Mhm.
protect ourselves and have a defense prepared. But part of intimacy is taking down those barriers and those natural habits of self-protection, and being willing to be vulnerable in another person's presence.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said was having another person to talk to, whether it's maybe a therapist or a trusted friend or something along those lines. I would probably lean towards the therapist. I'm starting my own therapy. Just like this week, I met with them, and they're gonna put me with the right person or whatever. So
Mhm.
I'm honestly I'm excited about it. I know that it's going to help. And having that other person, that unrelated person to kind of just bounce ideas from and say, well, maybe if you approach it this way, that might be better, or, think about it this other, look at it from this point of view. I really think that those type of things are super, super helpful. But even that, even getting to a point where you're willing to talk to a therapist, that's a challenge. If somebody is out there and is not sure if they are ready to talk to a therapist or if they should be talking to a therapist, what would you say to someone who's kind of on the fence about talking to a therapist at all?
I'd say get online and just look at people's profiles and read about what they have to say and see if you have a reaction to their photographs. That's one way to just kind of dip a toe in and get a sense of how this world works. Certainly, we're all very different from one another, and there are many schools of thought about therapy, but just educating yourself by just looking at the people who are doing the work is a one way to start getting your bearings. And I think too, just making some list for yourself in preparation about what do I want out of this, or how do I imagine this might help me? How can it serve my interests? So that you would start making your phone calls or sending your emails with some kind of agenda,
Hmm.
so that you're not just showing up like a blank slate. You can say, like, this is the issue I'd like to work on, or this is the way I'd like to start growing. That helps us know how we can address your concerns or give you some kind of sample really of how we
Hmm.
might work with you.
So if I am going to hire a therapist, I should have some kind of a goal in mind or some kind of a an outcome that I'd like to see. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it could be like a problem you're working on now, or some kind of aspiration or hope you have about, like, this is the way I'd like my life to be better. These are the
Hmm.
improvements that I like to see. So the more we know what you're looking for, then we can give you some sort of useful response about, like, this is how I generally help this kind of client, or here are some situations like yours that I've worked on and some of the sort of techniques that I've used with clients.
That makes sense. I when I spoke with the first therapist, I don't know if this is going to be my therapist forever, but when I spoke to him, they went through a series of questions just to kind of get an understanding of, where I need help. I ended up, talking basically about business and relationships, finances and relationships. Like, these are the big stressors in my life, and where I personally need to improve. And so to me, that's like a very broad and general topic. Do I need to dive down even deeper when I am uh looking for this therapist, or is that kind of what a therapist would help me do?
Well, I think a therapist probably wants you to pace yourself, and sometimes what have happen is that people might have a first session with me, or want to speak briefly on the phone before we meet, and sometimes they spill over so much. They tell me so much about themselves, it might feel a bit too exposing, and
Hmm.
then it's hard for them to want to come back because they let their defenses down without knowing me and not knowing whether they can
Oh.
really trust me. It's reasonable, like in any relationship, it takes a little time to get a sense of how I tick. And, you learn by my responses, do I seem like somebody who's on your wavelength? And are we a good fit? So we don't need for you to come in and just blah and disclose everything, because sometimes that's not in your own interests. We want you to have a comfortable pace and have an opportunity to feel out, like, are you in the right spot, and are we a good fit before you take it all the way.
Nice. I love it. Well, thank you for the advice for anybody who might be on the fence about getting a therapist. And I'm starting to believe more and more that everybody should. Now, circling us back to dismantling our sex negative culture, what are some big things, some big themes that you are seeing from your patients, from your own experience? That really drive the nail home that we have to start having these conversations in the broader culture. And what are those conversations? What questions or what topics do we need to be talking about to start opening these things up and really giving people the space to be themselves?
That's a big question. I guess I'm just thinking about how, I mean, I just see more and more insistence from younger people that this has
Hmm.
to be acknowledged. We have to recognize that sex is relevant to everyone. And certainly, as we see more efforts to get rights for trans people and make sex work legal and have more. Freedom in our culture, I think there's going to be more room for people to be fully sexual to whatever extent they want. I think these are just tough conversations to have. One of the struggles that I hear from the people I see who are in open relationships or polyam relationships is, how do I let other people know? Kind of
Right.
like what I was just saying a few minutes ago, like, how do I tell whether it's safe for somebody to know what my life is really like,
Hmm.
especially well, anywhere, in family contexts, and certainly work is a whole nother
Hmm.
realm, and you have to maintain your kind of professional boundaries to keep your job. There can be, it's not a frequent thing, but the more exposure open relationships get, the more volume of people are doing it. We see people who run into legal difficulties and
Right.
struggles about who's allowed to be with the ill person on the ICU, or
Hmm.
who gets to have custody of that child. So those kinds of very tangled questions get introduced. But I think, having that sense that you want to tread carefully, because once you've said something to somebody, you can't unsay it. You can't
Right.
take it back once you've disclosed. So the more careful you are about protecting yourself and making sure that it's only trusted people who have your information, I think that's really where we are right now. But there's more and more acknowledgement in media, and certainly for youth oriented media, I think there's more recognition that open relationships can be loving, committed, long lasting, healthy. I think there's just more receptivity to that idea that this isn't some weird fringe thing that only the strange do, or, that's only for people who are not well.
Hmm.
So that gives me hope.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, you're right. And when you're right, you're right. And you're always right.
In fact, just today, I went to get my hair cut, and I know my barber pretty well. So, we're catching up, and I'm talking about this podcast, talking about the Practicing Polyamory podcast. And somebody who's sitting on a bench overhears the word polyamory. He's like, what? Polyamorous? I'm polyamorous. I got two wives. And he's, comes over and shows me pictures. And it's just like this cool, exciting moment that we're,
Well, that's cool, baby. I mean, you know how it is.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. We're having like more of these conversations and more of the representation. Like I say at the beginning of the show, the more stories we have, the more representation that we're able to provide. There was somewhere that I wanted to go with that, and I'm trying to backtrack my brain a little bit. You were talking about the legal issues, and I was thinking that there aren't legal protections for polyamory and open relationships, non-monogamy,
Mhm,
etc., in the same way that we have over the years developed protections for sexual orientation.
mhm,
So for our LGBTQA, etc. community,
mhm.
what, if any, conversations need to start happening in order for some of those legal protections to kind of start coming to fruition? I mean, do you see it personally as something that's even possible for us to have these legal protections for the relationship styles that we choose?
I think already the city of Somerville, Massachusetts has extended domestic partner benefits to include households of more than two people.
Mhm,
So, what I have seen over time is that any of these kinds of legal changes tend to happen on a a local level, and then get extended by, county, state, and become legislation gradually. But they have to start as a little seed in a community where
mhm,
people
mhm.
cared about this enough that they signed petitions or showed up at boring meetings and made it happen. I
Right.
do know that I don't know if this is helpful, but I want to mention one resource that your listeners might want to know about is the Kink Aware Professionals website,
Oh.
because there are a lot of attorneys in the kink community. And so there are a lot of attorneys who like helping people who are in alternative relationships. And those people are resources and can offer guidance to all of us about legal actions, legal protections, and how to get involved in activist efforts.
Nice. And while you were talking about it, I went ahead and Googled it, and that is kapprofessionals.org. Kink
Mhm.
Aware Professionals, kapprofessionals.org. Thank you for that very valuable resource, Kate. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's good leadership among people who are represented on that site, and I know that they are way more informed than I am about the law, and have really been kind of slogging away at these causes over time as cases come up. When there are examples of cases in the courts, then they get used to set a precedent if they have a decision in the favor of the people who are in the lifestyle, or affected. So I
Mhm.
think that's how we see these small efforts grow bigger and bigger.
You're not as much of an activist as you used to be, but these types of issues, these things that we're talking about, they're political subjects. Like,
Very
you
much
know,
so.
somebody on the right that's conservative is probably not going to be in agreement with this type of lifestyle. It's going to be very contradictory to how they believe. But despite that, we're still making movements. There's still progress being made. Is it activism to have a podcast like this, to join groups, and what kinds of organizations do you know of any that are you know fighting for these rights? And I guess probably the kink aware professionals might know better,
Right.
um but yeah, I'm just trying to think of how tying the activism into polyamory and trying to make a change. That's
hmm
what I want to do.
Yeah, and I mean, when I use the term activism, I'm thinking in a more specific way about promoting legislative change. Taking
Hmm.
actions that mean the law may be changed. So that's something that I'm not so directly involved in these days. But I'd very much think that just spreading the word like you're doing and increasing public awareness is a form of activism too. Um, Talking about sex work being something that's a legitimate job that
Hmm.
should be legalized is a form of activism, because that's startling to many people and it really changes their mental model.
Hmm.
So I think any of those kinds of conversations can be really mind opening and useful. And that's where we want to be, is helping people think in new ways. We've got these maybe irrevocable changes going on in our culture because of COVID and the economy. And
Hmm.
maybe this is a ripe time to start changing things and re-examining a lot of things with the environmental challenges we face, and just so many people feeling repressed and unhappy. I think there's a lot of room to bring in fresh ideas, and consider that a lot of the way that we live and the assumptions that we labor under could be really different.
Try to make the world a better place.
Yes.
Now you're mocking me.
No, 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 not at all, not at
I've
all.
been a social worker since I was 3. I'm sorry.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Just believing in just principles, and having an idea about that the world should be a certain way.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate what you were saying there. I think you answered my unasked question. My unasked question was, what can we do, to promote some of this stuff, to kind of be activists for the polyam community. And I think that you nailed it, with talking about having the conversations, starting those conversations, being online and bringing awareness and, joining different movements, wherever it is that it's locally available to you. And, nowadays it doesn't even all have to be local, because we have
Indeed.
all of these online communities, and finding out about the legislation that's coming up, and, just helping to support legislation. So all that good stuff. Anything else that I missed there?
I can't really think of anything else to say. I loved your questions, and I'm just really delighted we had an opportunity to talk.
Me too. It's been fun. Why don't you tell everybody, especially for those who are listening on the podcast, if they wanted to work with you, how could they best get in touch with you? And are there any restrictions on who you can help?
Well, I'm just always happy to be a resource and answer questions anytime I can. I'm licensed in a few states, so I see people in various parts of the country, but you can just look me up on sexpositivetherapist.com. And if you have a question, send me a note and I'll get back to you via email as quickly as I can.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you again, Kate, for spending some time with me, giving me a little bit of insight on what we can do as a community to start attacking this sex negative culture, and, bring power to the people, power to ourselves, and hopefully make some positive change.
Thanks again so much.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, as always, to our live audience as well. As a reminder, when we're live, you get no commercial interruptions, but the same cannot be said for those podcast downloads. So if you want to avoid the commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us live Monday through Wednesday, 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for our Patreon, where you get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever it is that you download your podcast. And if you haven't already, please leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it. All right, everybody. Don't forget to follow at Practicing Polyamory. I saw that just as I was coming back. Anyway, all right. Beautiful Wednesday. Catch you all next week. Until then,
Have a nice day!
Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website, or by subscribing at Patreon.